Greetings and salutations, listener. It is I, Eric J. Chucky, joined, as always, by the boy.
Yo.
This week, we're talking about elves.
Elves, ladies and gentlemen. Elves of Dungeons and Dragons. And other fantasy settings, I assume.
I mean, theoretically, we're trying to stick to the D&D because this is continuing the 2018 year of D&D. I've played a lot of elves in my time. How about you?
You know, honestly, in the grand scheme of things, not really.
Yeah, I think when I met you, you mentioned you at that point you'd never played an elf before.
Well, it's been so long that maybe if I had, I don't remember it.
Yeah.
I don't recall having done so, but...
But you have used them a lot as a DM, so let me start with you on this one. What is it you like about elves?
What I like about elves, as a race to DM, as a race for my setting, is I kind of enjoy that in sharp contrast to the dwarf. I enjoy that there are like 1,000 different kinds of elf.
I would agree.
Which means that while you can use another more niche race for a specific thing, you can also probably slot an elf into so much of what you might need out of various kinds of NPC that you can do what you want with elves, because there's so many different kinds of elves, even in just D&D, not getting into wider fantasy. Even in just D&D, there's so many even different sub-races of elves that you can it's like a great big elf buffet. You can sort of go across and pick what pieces of elf culture or elf subrace that you like and think is useful for your setting, and use that and leave the rest to the side, and no one will notice, because all elves are valid, as it were.
That's it's something that draws me to them, I think, subconsciously up until this point where I'm deeply analyzing it on the internet. There's a lot of spice in the different kinds of elves and a lot of themes to explore with one really good default racial package in terms of stats.
Yeah, usually, and it varies from season to season. It varies from edition to edition, but usually elves will have one very solid base setting, and then you get some tat thrown on top for whatever subrace you are.
Yeah, it's hard to turn down trance.
God, yeah, no, that's I think 30% of the reason minimum why you play so many elves.
I mean, it's just so handy, and especially and the way they handle it in 5th edition works a little bit more to my advantage. You're still aware of everything. You can do light whatever, so long as you're not actively, engaging with something difficult.
Like you could read a light novel or do some housework.
Yeah, and that counts as trancing. When we're out in the wilderness and I'm playing an elf, I can be like, "Oh, I've got watch. You guys sleep through the night. We don't have to sleep in shifts. We don't have to do any of that. I'll just stand here and watch the horizon." And
my elf eyes will see danger before it comes.
Yeah, and the subraces, high elves especially, when I play them, I lean toward either high elves or dark elves because that's how I roll. But in 5th edition, they get that cantrip, and that's nice.
And that's a purely mechanics thing in 5th edition. Elves are a very well-designed race. Not all races in 5th edition, I would say, that's true for. We'll get to those eventually. There are some races I feel are a little shoddily designed in 5th edition that could use a little tightening up, but elves aren't one of them. All the various sub-races, they all have their base elf, solid trance, usually a dex modification.
And dex is they're
big. They're +2.
And then each of the sub-races has their own
little side thing and their own little side benefits. If you notice, I actually only recently have I started using what I often consider to be sort of the weak cousin of the elves, which is the wood elf. I've never really, as a D&D race, I've never really been a humongous fan of wood elves. They're, unless you're just playing Legolas, they have they don't have as much room to maneuver. Because even an elf in another subrace has, like, their racial thing, their archetype. But they can deviate from it pretty starkly and still seem to fit. Whereas if you make a wood elf who isn't, to a certain extent, a hippie or Legolas, it doesn't sound right.
Well, I think, honestly, you're kind of contradicting yourself in your very statement. Legolas, for being a wood elf, just acted like a, regular person.
Yeah, that's why I say or Legolas. He's the other one.
I mean, yeah, but I think there's room for contrast in there. Where your past is not what defines you. It's very intrinsic with the background like that. You came from the trees, but there is ultimately a reason you left. Much like your backgrounds, you were a merchant or you were a this or that, and maybe you still are, but now you're a cleric, Mm-hmm. And I think it falls into, this happens to me a lot when I'm making a character. I fall into the trap of these mechanics align, so I should attempt to exploit that.
Yeah, you fall into the trap of wanting the most mechanically efficient option to an extent that you limit your other options to only what is mechanically efficient.
Right. Well, and that's a little bit because I roll like piss.
So you have to try and gather up every advantage. And that's been going away in the last few years.
Yeah, it hasn't been as bad.
I think you're absorbing my luck because my absurd luck from when I was younger is also going away.
I'll take it because it means I can play whatever the hell I want instead of having to pigeonhole myself into something to make up for mediocre stats and mediocre rolls. My rolls usually aren't bad, mind you, but they're softly in the middle, which means
8 to 211.
Yeah. I've literally rolled a set of stats that was all 13s. But yeah, you can take a wood elf and you can be that wood elf cleric, and you can be a wood elf cleric of like the goddess of nature, or you can choose something else.
And that's sort of what I mean is I only recently started doing that as a DM. I only recently started finding a place for them in my setting.
Yeah.
Whereas other elves I've never had a problem with. I really like using drow.
I like drow a lot, and I feel they get unfairly maligned because of Drist. And I honestly wonder how much of an impact Drist Do'Urden has on the modern D&D player. Because, yeah, in the 90s, and I think it was the 90s when he showed up, wasn't it? Was it earlier than that? 80s?
I believe it was the 90s, yeah.
Whatever, correct us in the comments. When he became a big thing, and for about 10 years after that, yes, he was a problem. People would read the novels, myself included, and were like, oh, I want to be that. That's cool. Because he is cool. But, like, then you've got a whole world of, singular elves that broke away from their homeland and aren't evil like the rest of them, which only makes sense. I mean...
First title released in 1988.
88, so I thought it might be the late 80s.
But you're right, I don't think it has much of an impact on... certainly not one on me. I never really read those books. I don't really give a fuck about them. I like drow as drow. I
like that too.
Drow society.
Mm-hmm.
I love that it is. I love exactly how it functions as an antagonist society because it clearly is intended to be one. It's clearly intended to be the place where the baddies come from.
Right.
And it's really good at it because it's built from the top down in such an amazing way. I've always admired the really solid world building of drow society because I love that it would fall apart instantly without Lolth. And that's exactly how Lolth wants it. Because she wants them dependent on her.
Right. It's just really well built. It's, and it's interesting. And then, like, visually even, it's interesting. And... But,
I do want to mention, since you've played more elves, aside from the mechanics, because the mechanics are always good. But that's true of a lot of D&D races. They're usually good at what they're good at. What do you like fluff-wise about playing elves? Why do you enjoy playing an elf as a person?
That's a funny thing. Elves are... I haven't checked my spreadsheet in a while. But my two most played races in fantasy games are humans and elves. The fact that humans is one of them surprises the hell out of me.
They're the standard.
They are. I guess I've just, sometimes you play a human. But... elves are sort of a weird outlier because it's very, the stereotype of the elf, without getting into the, let's
Snooty
say,
aristocrat douchehead.
well, yeah, but like without getting into the B tier and below elf subraces,
Right.
you have snooty aristocrat, who's all aloof and whatnot. Oh, I am of the fair people. And then you have the, get out of our forest kind of elves, the wood elves. And I don't think
Violent eco-terrorists and the 1%.
I have played exactly one elf that was the 1%, and even he was sort of a play on the trope. So I don't even really play into that stereotype. Like, it's more making hay out of what those stats give me, and trying to fit into whatever culture there was. I mean, when I was younger, I just played elves because, I don't know, they in a very simple way, spoke to things I wanted. Elves live forever, they get cool magic, and they're neat. They got pointy ears, that's kind of cool, but not like Spock, a different kind of pointy ears.
Sometimes.
Like, they get cool eye colors and, like, cool hair colors, and it was just...
They're a protagonist race.
Yeah,
Again, in contrast to dwarves, who are very much a supporting character race. Like, it's hard to find a fantasy anything where a dwarf is the main character.
And from my personal experience, most of the circles I operate in have moved past the idea of the DMPC. I would say
there is a place for it.
I would say traditionally, in traditional 1970s Dungeons and Dragons fantasy, the elf is the DMPC race.
Yeah, because in a D&D party there isn't a protagonist.
Right.
There's an ensemble, so elf stands out enough that...
Well, and in a novel or a movie or whatever, more so, the elf is the wispy person who knows all the things and does secret magics and is way better than whatever it is you're doing. And, acts as someone for the main character
they
to look up
become
to.
a plot point. They become a
Gandalf.
MacGuffin.
Yeah.
They're Gandalf. Wizard, not Gandalf, honestly. Like D&D wizard, very much not Gandalf.
No. But, yeah, now, with our modern stuff, I mean, let's be real, Tiefling's probably the PC race.
No, I would still say that, like, in contrast to Dwarf, which is very much a supporting character race, and also contrasting Elf and Dwarf is the age-old pastime.
Sure.
Elf is very much the protagonist race.
Yeah.
They get the special stuff, and they're super unique, and there's a million different kinds, and they get the cool jewel eyes that every teenager wants, and...
I mean, that's it in a nutshell. They're the scene kids of the fantasy world. There's a lot of different flavors, a lot of different colors, and you can play 50 elves and not play the same elf twice. I'm living proof. But this is a 30-minute podcast. What do you not like about elves?
I don't like that if you spend time examining, and I've wrestled with this for a long time. If you spend time examining an elf's lifespan, shit starts to break down real fast. I
think we've done a lot of like homebrew stuff on how that shit works.
Yeah, but at base, in D&D, elves aren't considered adults until they're like well into their hundreds.
I think 75 or something like that.
Yeah, like, depending on the edition. Yeah. I never remember what the exact number is because they've changed it a bunch.
Sure.
But until what amounts to what all humans would know as an old person, at the minimum, which throws a lot of character concepts out the window. Because unless they just have a learning disability, by the time they're considered an adult, they should be relatively world-wise and not naive, because they've been around for nigh on a century. So you can't really play in a setting like D&D, where elves do have that long life, and they're not just pointy-eared humans, like Dragon Age.
Pointy-eared, subjugated humans.
Well, yeah. Elves exceeded poverty.
Yeah.
But in a setting where they do have that long lifespan, you can't play like a young up-and-comer as an elf. It doesn't make any sense. Any elf you meet is likely 300 years old, minimum. And it also makes it hard for them to have understandable, to have a relationship, either romantic or platonic, any deep, intimate relationship with a non-long-lived race. Because, they have to see you as a pet. To a certain extent.
I think the degree... Speech. We often remark that sentience is the big separation between people and animals. I've seen enough animals act with intent to know that they're sentient creatures. They're sapient creatures. But they can't talk to you with your words. So that's a big, game changer. And I think that's what keeps elves. I think that's what put humans from being like, oh, how sweet they are. I want to bring one home and keep it for a while, and then it dies. But that's what happens with humans. And more, oh god, you poor short-lived thing. When do you even do stuff?
Yeah, and that's one way of interpreting it, and that's usually the way you do as a player character. You usually really, as an elf, you always really realistically play someone who is arrogant and condescending about lifespan to an absurd degree.
Or just not even aware of because the way I work around what you were talking about, the fact that elves get to about a century before they're playable characters, is I spent most of my 20s faffing about. For better or for worse, regardless of my intentions, I spent most of my 20s just doing whatever, just floating. And I figure through each stage of an elf's life, as humans in the modern era, we shotgun education real quick. You get right in there, you get all that stuff done. Elves are just kind of fucking around for 100 years.
Well, yeah, but unless they learn really slowly, all that means is they have a bunch more free time for life lessons.
A bunch of free time for life lessons, and then also a bunch of free time for doing the medieval equivalent of sitting on their couch watching Cheetos and binging Netflix.
Watching Cheetos.
Watching Cheetos and binging. I do. I watch them look all delicious over there.
But not for long.
Munching is what I meant to say. But so yeah, your elf has indeed read the entire, centology of the adventures of Steve. Yeah, they've got some media life lessons in there, sure, but not all of those are applicable to real life. They might be really, really fucking good at gardening, and I think 5th edition works with this well, because in 5th edition terms, you're only ever going to get so good at any given skill. They try to be like, well, that's why high elves have this spell, see, because they did a little bit of wizarding, and that's...
Yeah, every high elf who's a player character in D&D is also that guy who makes craft beer on the weekends, but for wizardry.
And they get extra skill training and stuff. There's stuff intrinsic to it, but it's did that really take 50 extra years?
Because it took my human wizard 25 minutes.
So, I think just elves aren't in a hurry to go anywhere.
So, I guess supremely lazy is another way of doing it.
Well, yeah. or just where the hell do I have to be? Hey, did you take the garbage out? No, I was going to do that last year. I forgot. My bad. Let me go do that now. Just no concept, because you got to figure the difference between us and a mayfly. Let's say a mayfly had the exact same sentience. To us, we'd be like, wow, those guys are just booking it. They're just trying to get through their lives. Stop and smell the roses, and the thing's like, I only have so much time!
Oh, no, I get it. I get it, but it's hard to wrap around those things existing on the same time scale as the mayfly, and not treating the mayfly as an absurd inferior.
Well, and that's why a lot of your elves are supposed to be so haughty and whatnot. I like to bring mine down to earth. But it does raise questions. And as much as they feel like an entry-level race... we got cat aggro as usual on here.
The cat is playing around with a bag. Deal with it.
It's delightful. It's adorable.
She's adorable. You
wish you were here. As much as they feel like the entry-level obvious, this is one of the D&D races. There's a lot of really weird, esoteric demands of being an elf that you don't think about.
Yeah, and it's all cruft from basically, Tolkien and, 3 other different authors, mostly. Right. So much so that, that's the default. When I say elf, you think Tolkien elf in D&D. Unless I mention Christmas, that's just the case. And that's not the case before George R. R. Tolkien. Before J.R.R. Tolkien. It's the RRs. It's damn bastard. Fat sailor hat motherfucker. But before James Tolkien. Before Tolkien, that's not what elves were. If anything, that's what dwarves were.
Yeah, kind of. And like I've distanced myself from that.
I find it interesting that that's so formative.
So like there's a thing. We're kind of babbling here, and that's okay. We're kind of broadening into the next thing. What do I hate about elves? I don't like the dark elf racial vision penalty.
It makes sense,
yeah.
But as a playable race in 5th edition, where almost nothing has a penalty, it is a little bit harsh.
And like, what do you get in compensation for it?
Basically,
a spell
bunch
package,
a bunch of useless spells.
Yeah, very, very situational. Like, not even as useful as your default tiefling stuff.
Fire, and Darkness together are great, but we could do a separate podcast on how unfairly useless the spell Darkness is. Anyway, move on.
Bear with me for a second, okay? Both you, the listener, and my podcast partner here, the boy. There's a concept, and I'm not trying to invite anything by this. It's just a school of thought that is a thing that exists in Christianity, certain sects of Christianity, that talk about Jesus the man. Okay? To most people, to most Christians, he's this great, untouchable God figure. But he also walked as a man. That's, like, in the Bible. So, like, people don't think about the fact that he did regular people stuff. He would have had to. He was the dude. And a similar concept is what I go through when I make elves. Not from that point, but as a frame of reference for what I'm saying, for something for everybody to understand. Yes, these are creatures that live forever, and they have all these things, but, like, they also take shits. Unless you're really clever with prestidigitation, as I am sometimes. Take that as your cantrip, and you never got to wipe.
He has brought this up at the table before.
No muss, no fuss. Who needs to worry about it? But they're people at the end of the day. They fall in the mud, and they take a shit, and they make bad romantic calls, and they eat food they oughtn't have, and things that were not actually food, and they exist as walking, living creatures who have to suffer through the same stupid life as you. So, like, for all the Tolkien Elrond in his flowing robes and his great knowledge, that guy walked into a doorway at one point. He had to have. I don't care how high your dex is, shit happens.
He rolled out of elf bed and was floating towards, the delicious elf kitchens full of delicious elf food, and he misjudged a step and cranged his knee on like a banister.
Loudly. By Galadriel's tits that hurt! Are you okay, my friend? I winged my fucking knee, Gandalf! Now is not the time! It had to have happened! So, like...
So you make an effort to strip them of the sort of lofty dignity that their archetype provides.
Yes, because not only does this guy have to shit, but he's been shitting for 70 years.
So he's presumably really good at it?
I mean, like, it's, he's been having humbling moments for 70 years. It's these are still real people. Like, forgetting the deterioration of age on our minds, look at a spry senior citizen.
Yeah.
Like someone who's still really well-thinking and physically fit, for their age, or even better than me, I'm sure.
There are a lot of 85-year-olds who would beat the shit out of me in both athletic competition and violent competition.
If these people do not feel as though their death is looming, as many do, they just sort of become low-level trickster deities. They realize exactly how stupid everything is, and just are like, all right, I've been around for a while, let's fucking go.
They run out of fucks to give.
Yeah, they run out of fucks to give. So elves, like, they're real, and they care about things, but in the broad scheme of things, they have no fucks. And, like, the way they look at younger races, shorter-lived races who are like, oh, I gotta worry, I gotta do this thing, it's like, or, don't worry about it so much, because, good God, you only have, like, what are you, like, 30? I'm 50. Oh my God! Fucking eat a delicious pie. I'll go save the world. Good Lord!
Yeah, like I mentioned, you're really good at baking in absurd arrogance into the elf's perspective. Because that's all that is.
I mean,
that is just on a level of unbelievable, like, chauvinism.
To an extent.
The elf man's burden,
but
as it were.
It's not so much, especially when I do it, and you can look at it this way yourself, so that you don't have to be the haughty elf, necessarily. The one who just thinks he's better than everybody else. It comes from a place of concern and caring. Like, you wouldn't want your dog to mow the lawn.
Fuck, that would be awesome!
Well, it would be great and a fun trick, but then you're out there drinking your lemonade, watching the dog mow the lawn, and you're like, good God, his stupid, bony, unworking legs, what if he slips? He's just going to fall right into that lawnmower, it's going to kill him. Dog! Put the dog... I will mow the lawn, my friend. I am so worried about you. Don't. You only live so long anyway. Please don't ruin one of your legs during this time. I care so much for you. And there's also the concept as well of, like, I don't know, elves, I don't know, going beyond having shame, doing stupid things, because, good God, I've done enough stupid things, you know.
Oh, wow, that was getting up and singing in front of all those people. You're a really bad singer. That must have been embarrassing. No?
Yeah.
One.
Rude.
Two, I in 100 years, none of these people are going to be around and no one will remember this. And I'll be fine. 3, you know how I know? 200 years ago, I did this exact same thing in this exact same bar.
Do you know how many times I've accidentally shit myself? Like, you in your lifetime, you've done it, what, probably twice?
All right, I've been alive for 500 years.
And I remember every one like it was yesterday. One was yesterday. I was very drunk. But I think there's a way to really ground your elves. But we're winding down, and I think we've still got so much more to share. How do you work elves into your setting?
I like to fill them in at the fringes. Because ultimately, like, their main narrative in the thing that codified them as a trope for D&D is that they are the fading race. They are the race that is leaving room for the new races. I like using that one at some points. I do like using that occasionally with certain kinds of elves. Either them being at peace with it or being very bitter about it in certain settings that I've used. And also, I enjoy just having them filled in at the fringes. Using them as... I'm sure you've seen me do this a lot as a DM. If, an NPC walks up and it needs a description, I will pause for a second, roll my eyes up, and then give you a race. That's me filling in that character's life.
Okay.
Because elves live so long, it is reasonable to assume that there could be an elf in pretty much any given station in any given situation.
What is your name, sir?
Any NPC could be an elf.
I am General Lethwillen. General? Yes, I once fought in many great wars. I saved the country, drove back invaders. Anyway, did you want fries with that?
Exactly. And that's I like using that because it makes the setting feel more like a fantasy setting.
Yes.
If elves aren't special. If they're not in their special little enclaves where no one sees them.
Right.
If they're just a part of the world. And there are some that live in their special enclaves where no one sees them, and I use those too. But I like using the idea that if you go to like a rich person's house, the footman might be an elf. And this footman has served this human aristocrat family for 400 years. For the entire family's lifespan, he's been essentially their Alfred. And
what an awesome character concept.
Yeah, That was literally just now. I just made that up just now.
And like, I mean, you could go full Alfred. He could have been like Secret Service, SAS sort of character before.
Yeah, but like when the noble family was formed, it was formed off a conquering general for the king, and he was that guy's right hand man. He was that human conqueror's right hand man, his wet works guy. And then as the human aged, he watched over in the secret shadows, he watched over that guy's descendants, still being, his right hand man, the man he sent to do the dark jobs. And then slowly he just started being their butler, because that's an easy way to always be around and have no one notice you. And so 400 years later, he is this family's, master of spies and butler. But he is genuinely also literally actually their butler. Like, he makes them dinner and puts the kids to bed and all that shit. And
so
he's
cool.
content with his life. He loves his position. He loves the kids. He raised the last 6 generations of this family, and he's content to do it for the next 8. And then he'll fuck off and do something else.
It's good stuff.
And I like being able to use elves as fixers, as like that little ringer you need in case you need someone who is available to provide a little extra spice to something.
That's cool. I tend to do my elves in smaller numbers.
You do. You very much turn into the skid of them being the fading race.
Well, and they're fading just because the other races reproduce more.
I've done that. I did that very specifically in one setting where elves were losing the race of reproduction badly.
And it's not a problem. It's just more that, I don't know, elves don't want to sit around and have a bunch of kids. I'm not sure what the reason is. I'm sure each individual elf has their own issues.
I usually just make them very infertile.
Sure, that could be it too. But it's not like, oh, we're going to be gone in 100 years. It's more,
there's only many of us.
Yeah, there's only a couple thousand, whatever. So they have...
And we all know each other. Yeah. Do you know Larius? Oh, yeah, Larius. He's, he's working in a foundry like 4 continents over, right? Yeah, we used to hang out back in the 200s.
So that lets me play with... Because, while playing an individual elf as an individual person, you can have all these reasonable outlooks. People in general, when you gather them together, tend to go a little stupid about their ideas. So it's still fun to play with those broader elvish stereotypes of, oh yes, all of these elves that are all living together in this tower over here sit up in the tower and go, yes, we know what's best for all of you because we're elves. Or all of these wood elves that are all in this one little forest get really xenophobic and defensive because they're not out in the outside world like your singular adventurer elf. So I can still, mess with those ideas by keeping their population small, keeping them similar because of it, and still have the option for the elves that are kind of like, I'm different. And it makes sense. I have traveled the world for hundreds of years. Of course I'm very eclectic and know all this stuff and don't hate everybody like these wood elves over here who don't want you to step on their twigs. It's an old magic card thing. It was like a flavor text. It was like a bone broken for every twig snapped. And it's like, that shit's already on the ground.
Calm down.
Get over yourself.
It's already dead.
It's dead.
I'm literally helping it decompose. There are little forest beetles and shit that really are happy with me right now.
The chicken has already nuggets.
You can't unnuggets this chicken. Please leave me alone.
I've been playing a lot more with Dark Elves lately. In my own personal setting, I use a version of...
Dunmer.
Yeah, Dunmer of the Elder Scrolls Dark Elves. I think they're really interesting. I think they work as like, as I said at the top of this, it makes sense that some drow would want to leave Drowtown.
Because their society is garbage pile shit awful.
And more than one guy would be successful. So, there are traditional Dungeons & Dragons drow in my current setting. They're also more like Dunmer. Yes, they still have a relationship with insects and arachnids that are very, predominant in the Underdark. As they move to the surface, they no longer have the sight restrictions. They also don't have the racial magic quite the same. But it's fun to explore, it's...
Whereas I use a very, very traditionalist version of drow.
Yeah.
And I also moved them off the prime material plane because I have issues with the Underdark being in the prime material plane. Just That should be magma.
Maybe they got a real good crust. There's like a lot of it.
There's a big,
There's lots of room for caves.
big crust energy.
Elves are fun. I don't have a lot bad to say about them. I have plenty to say about players who use them as a tool to be a dickhead, but the same thing could be said for chaotic neutral and
almost every single D&D.
And lawful good, for that matter. So
it's just a different kind of dickhead.
Yeah, it's the problems of player, not the stuff. Much like dwarves, they're just pretty good all around.
There are some race concepts that I feel nudge you towards acting like a dickhead.
Gnome.
I mean, I was gonna say Kender.
Hey, Kender.
But we're not talking about that.
No, we're not. This is about elves, and we had fun with elves.
Yeah.
I had fun. You terrible, short-lived creatures, you poor bastards. You spent a whole 36 minutes watching this podcast. Go do something with your lives.
He's not an elf. Everything's better when nerds talk about it.